Welcome to another bite-sized series in our masterclasses for community events. Today we're looking at the public events framework. It's a bit of a challenging one because it's information that's changing quite rapidly and constantly. So I guess a bit of a disclaimer on this one is this information is current as at the 29th of October 2021. I encourage you all to keep up to date with new information as it comes to hand because it's changing all the time. And at the moment and over the next few months, I would imagine it will change quite drastically. So for those of you that haven't yet joined any of our webinars, a quick introduction. I'm Linda Tillman. I'm the Managing Director of Tillman Group and also the founder of Revents Academy. We work in the regional tourism and event space right across regional Australia, and I'm really excited to be working on this webinar series. If you would like more information about what we do, jump on to tillmangroup.com.au or reventsacademy.com. All right. So what we're going to cover in this session is what is the public events framework. I know most of you will know that by now. It's not new information. How to access up-to-date information. We're going to look at how to determine your event tier, which is an important part of this whole process. And then I'm going to touch on the key requirements to operate a COVID-safe event. So there's those 5 key areas that you need to think about. And obviously they're things that are changing as well. Whilst it's current today, and it will still give you some insights into what could be expected in the future, it may actually change a little bit. So the state government requirement is all based around this public framework, and it's important to remember that it is a state government requirement. So although you might be leaning on your local council for information on this, please also be a bit gentle because they are also learning from the state government as information comes to hand. So just keep that in mind. This is a state government requirement, so it is something that local government must enforce as well. And as I said, things are constantly changing. So the public events framework that exists at the moment on that website that you can see on the screen right now is version 3, which was current as at May 2021, and we're now almost in November 2021. So as we can see with the news, with double vax, etc., things are certainly looking like they will change very soon. So it's really important that you are prepared for change. Be ready to adapt. And I think more importantly, and on a positive note, be prepared to hold your events in 2022. The events industry is bouncing back in Victoria, and although we're not totally clear on what the compliance elements will be at this stage, you can be assured that it will be an exciting year, 2022, full of festivals and events. So stay up to date with current information, and you can do that via this link, coronavirus.vic.gov.au/public events. Now, this is I've jumped ahead one. This just quickly is the evaluation process. So this is in the framework. You can see if you download that framework, you'll see this evaluation process, but essentially it goes through 5 steps. So you submit your plan, and we're going to talk about that in a moment. There's an initial review, so it'll be evaluated against some criteria, and you'll be contacted by Department of Health if there's any further information required. It's then assessed, so your COVIDsafe plan will be assessed, and then you will get your outcome, which will talk to you about how you need to implement a COVIDsafe plan at your event. So it's a pretty straightforward process. It's a little bit of extra work, yes, but it makes sure that you're covered all your bases. Now, the first thing you need to do is undertake the self-assessment. So you'll see on the website, there's a self-assessment tool, and that will help you determine what tier event you are. So I'll just show you quickly on the website. So this is the website you'll go to, public events. Let me just get that out of the way. So as I said, up here in the URL bar, you can see that URL, but if you just search it through your Google, you'll find it. And this has all of the up-to-date current information. But down here, you'll see use the public event a self-assessment tool. Now, this is the self-assessment tool to help you determine what event tier you are. So I'll just quickly show you. It's a series of questions. You just work through those questions and then it will tell you whether you are a tier 1, 2 or 3. And this is essentially the tiers at the moment. So remember, this too could change in terms of the attendee numbers, etc. But it still is good just to get your head around it for now, because it just prepares us for the future. And if the future means it's easier, then that's a bonus. So tier 1 are for highly complex events, and they involve typically more than 7,500 attendees. So fairly large events. And for these events, you will need government approval and a COVIDsafe event plan. So it's probably the most rigorous process for the tier 1s. You move down to a tier 2. So that's moderately complex. So that involves 1,000 up to 7,500 attendees. So the tier 2 events that are seeking an exemption to the framework need government approval for a COVIDsafe plan. But if you can operate under the settings of the framework, then you need to prepare a COVIDsafe plan for your event. Then we've got tier 3. So this involves 1,000 attendees or fewer. So in this case, you don't actually have to do a comprehensive COVIDsafe plan, but you do need to fill out and submit a COVIDsafe event checklist. So that means you're still considering these different aspects that I'm about to talk about, but you don't have to go through as much detail, because obviously you're not seen as a higher risk as a tier 2 or a tier 3. So you need to go through that self-assessment tool to determine what tier you're in, because that ultimately determines what you have to do to be COVID safe. Now, both the checklist and the COVIDsafe plan, whether you're doing the simple version or the more complex version, it covers off on these 5 areas. So once again, even if these change, at least you've got your head around them. So I encourage you to really think about what these things may mean for your event. So sit down with your team, talk through them, consider them, think about how you would implement these different aspects so that you're prepared. And if it's less that you have to do, once again, that's a bonus. You can get a lot of detail on these 5 areas on that website. So if I just go here again, public events. So I'll just go back to public events out of the assessment tool in the framework in here. So this is the public events framework. So if I click on that, it'll download it. And that tells me more about all of these 5 particular areas and things that I need to be considering. But I'm just going to touch on each of them for you right now. Okay. First one is oversight and administration. So these are things like making sure you've got an appropriate governance structure that allows you to communicate to all authorities. So you've got to have the right people involved and the right processes in place to be able to deliver a COVIDsafe event. You also need to ensure that all workers, attendees, volunteers, staff, they all receive clear communication on expectations prior to the event. So that includes information on physical distancing, hygiene requirements, health messages, etc. So communication is really important. And the third point under this area is record keeping. So all event venues, spaces must use electronic record keeping through the service's VIC app or a government API linked digital system. So it has to be digital. Where possible, they also advise that you use multiple record keeping methods just in case something goes wrong. So adequate record keeping must be maintained for up to 28 days for all event attendees. The second area to consider is attendee management. So these are things like physical distancing strategies. So you need to think about how you're going to encourage and enable and ensure that people physical distance at your event. You need to ensure that all workers and attendees are screened for symptoms before the event. And this is where things like double vaxxing, how do we screen, rapid testing, you know, there's all this stuff being discussed at the moment. There's no answers for those things right now, but be assured that they will come. So just keep up to date. You also need to, for events that require first aid, medical and/or health services, you need to incorporate the management of COVID into those first aid plans. Event plans also need to consider how commingling and congregation areas can be prevented, especially when there's alcohol and food. So they want to see how are you actually preventing people from congregating in one place. So if you just imagine it in a practical sense, they want people spread over a bigger area. So typically people will congregate around a bar, they'll congregate around a main stage, they'll congregate around a food service area, they'll congregate around the entrance, the exit to your festival. So you need to think about those key locations and how can you prevent people from congregating in those areas. So that comes down to your site plan. Cleaning and hygiene is really important. So essentially you're going to have to up the ante on cleaning and hygiene, increasing the frequency of it and also the number of resources you have allocated to it. So you need to have a regular and thorough cleaning schedule that needs to factor in before, during and after the event. And it needs to focus especially on high traffic areas like toilets, frequently touched objects. So if there's door handles, counters and desks or railings, things like that. And you also need to provide adequate hand washing and sanitation facilities at the event. And they must be maintained throughout the event. So make sure there's always, you know, soap in the bathrooms, the sanitizers full. So having people designated to hygiene and cleaning is really important, and that's all their job. You'll see it, you've probably seen it yourself, you know, in shopping centres and shopping malls, there's people walking around and they're like COVID-safe hygiene officers, for example, and that's all they do. The next area to consider is workers, vendors and contractors. So all staff, workers, vendors, contractors and subcontractors must be trained in appropriate COVID protocols and procedures. And they also must have access to personal protective equipment and how to use it. So I want you to think about here, you know, food workers or food truck holders, caterers, cleaning workers, security, your own volunteers, anybody working at the event. And then finally, the other thing to consider are operational spaces. So this is where things like your site plan and layout comes into play, how you're actually planning out the site and how you're managing queues and high traffic areas. So places like, you know, public transport hubs, ticket offices, toilets, seating places, stages, back of house, you know, they're all areas that need to be considered and included in the COVIDsafe plan, and they need to comply with things like physical distancing, hand hygiene, and other COVIDsafe requirements. So it's not just about your festival or event site, it's also about those other areas where people are coming to and from your event, and other areas they may go during your event. So they're the 5 areas. As I said, jump into the website, download the public events framework. That gives you a few more tips and things to think about in these areas. But if you're not diving into developing a COVIDsafe plan now, knowing that that's potentially going to change, at least have some conversations around how do we implement these things for our event, because you can be assured there will certainly be, you know, some of these aspects, if not all of them, will remain as a requirement for events moving forward for at least the next 12 to 24 months. Now, some words of advice. So I spoke to a whole range of different events that have delivered a COVIDsafe event in the last 12 to 18 months, and these were some of their words of advice. Focus on ensuring the attendee experience is just as good despite the COVIDsafe measures. So don't dilute the quality of the experience and blame it on COVID. It's important that despite the guidelines and the compliance and the changes, you remain focused on the attendee experience. Number 2, do some role playing of processes to ensure that they can and will work in real life. So sometimes we can come up with a process or a new procedure in theory, then on event day, we go to implement it. We're like, that doesn't actually work. So test it out in real life. Talk direct to the public health unit and submit your COVIDsafe plan early so you can get any feedback really early and you can work together on solutions. Don't overthink it. You know, go back to basics. Don't, you know, it's kind of like, don't push in, wash your hands properly, stay away, don't get too close. So don't overthink it too much. Make it fun where you can. Start contact tracing processes early. So as you've just heard, the state government has some digital tools to be able to do that. Make sure that your volunteers are easily identifiable. If you have more space, use it. So chat to council as soon as you can about extending your site, if you can, because the more space you've got, the more capacity you'll be able to have. And the final 1.8, don't be restricted by the way you've done things in the past. This is an opportunity to think different. And just to finish up, some useful resources. Obviously, your council staff are there to assist you if you've got any specific questions, but most importantly, use this website. So you've got the COVIDsafe public events website. It talks you through everything. It will keep you up to date. There's the checklist template, the event plan template, there's where you register your event and the guidelines as well. So all the information is there. The most important thing you need to do is to keep up to date and talk to your council or source information when required. So thank you again and good luck with your upcoming event.